It's a force field. I wear my heart up on my sleeve like a big deal. Your love pours down on me.
You guys are going to get me emotional before I even get to start. So thank you for being here. It's an honor to be in the same room with all of you. I don't think I need to state this, but I'm an adult with CF, and I'm 41 years old. I'm from Alexandria, Virginia, where I live with my wife, Julie, and our two kids, Liam and Tate. I work full-time for a local home builder, banging my head against the wall trying to get things approved. And I have worn several hats in the foundation. I have loved all of them. Recently, just stepped down as co-chair of the advocacy with Drew and Jackie, who are up here in front. And I've had the pleasure of serving on my local board in DC for a couple of years now, and then participating in various different breathe-cons and panels and focus groups over the years. So before we get started, I'd love to bring on Isabel and Tony and have Isabel, and have them both introduce themselves. So Isabel.
Thank you so much, Chad. Thank you, all of you, for your incredibly inspiring speeches. I am so grateful to be part of this panel, and thank you for all you do for people with CF. So I am Isabel, or Isa. I'm 51 years old. I live in Redwood City, California. Thank you. And I was diagnosed at birth alongside my identical twin sister, Anna, or Annabelle. And we had a long, rocky road with cystic fibrosis. I was born within years of Alex DeFord and Joey McDonald. So I can't emphasize how grateful I am to be here. I am also 19 years post double lung transplant. It has been a wild adventure. Unfortunately, I'm dealing with some eye cancer, which happens with long-term immunosuppression, but I'm living a wonderful life. I am a social worker, hospice social worker, and grief counselor recently on disability. And most importantly, I'm proud to say I've been married for 25 years to Andrew. And I've been an active member and advocate and volunteer for the CF community, speaking at BreatheCon and NACFC, and publishing a memoir with my twin Anna, The Power of Two, to raise awareness of CF. So I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you, Chad, and thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Isabel. Tony?
Yes, hi, I am super stoked to be here. Thank you, Chad, and thank you, Isabel, and thank you for the members that put forth my name for this thing. So that's pretty awesome. And thank you all for the volunteer work that you guys do for the CF Foundation. It's been great. My CF story is I was diagnosed at birth in Hawaii to my two parents, but my mom is actually in the audience. So shout out Mother Cindy Madonna. What's up? For the most part, my CF story has been pretty easy in the scheme of things. All through high school, been pretty good. My weight has been the worst part, as per usual, but I was pretty healthy all through high school. College is when I kind of had my rocky start of IV antibiotics and bouts of mycobacterium infections and stuff like that. So that's really when it hit me hard that this was a disease that I really had to look after for my entire life. And luckily that I got through that in my mid-20s. I got rid of all that stuff and was pretty healthy once starting Trikafta 3 years ago, which has been a godsend. So that's been really good for me moving forward for the rest of my life. On the personal side of things, I have worked a plethora of different things. I am a jack of all trades. I've been a restaurant manager, a high school basketball coach, substitute teacher, but now I'm an office admin for 2 different companies. I work from home, which has been nice. My spare time, I run a Dungeons and Dragons YouTube channel with 3 of my friends. I'm the video editor, Peak D&D. You can see the little icon down there, possibly. Oh, down there, right there. Little plug. And I also play kind of part-time alternate as a drummer in a local band up in Breckenridge, Colorado. But I'm an avid music goer. Music is therapy. I love drumming. That's what I do. And that's just a little bit about me. So nerd on the side and drumming outside. So.
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Tony. So as we get started, our hope for this to share our stories with you all and dive into this idea of evolving dreams and how, as CF has evolved and changed over 51 years, 41 years, 31 years, what that's looked like and how that has impacted and sort of changed the way we look at different areas of our lives. And so as we start, I wanted to also acknowledge that all three of us are fortunate enough to be able to take modulators. And we know that there's still a long way to go so that we can all have a modulator or a cure. So you guys asked earlier today to write down what your dreams were. I don't know if you've had a chance to check out the board. Isabel, Tony, you can't see it, but there's a board on the side of the room where people have pinned a bunch of different dreams. And I just wanted to highlight some of them as I think they tie into a lot of what we plan to talk about today. And so a couple that stuck out to me were long, fulfilling lives full of joyous milestones, falling in love, building families, pursuing careers, going on adventures, and spending less time on treatments and more times on things we love. And so this last one sort of hits home and is a starting place, as I know, as we've talked, the three of us, over the past 4 weeks, 5 weeks, I think it's been, hearing the different ways that CF has progressed for all of us through the standards of care that were talked about earlier today, and some of these milestones. And so I would love it if, Isabel, you could sort of give us some of your experience being the wisest of the group here.
Thank you, Chad. Wisest and oldest, which is a tremendous honor. I think I've seen, I call it living the cure. I've been living the cure and watching so many things change in the CF community. When I was born, the life expectancy was 10 years, and there were no CF centers. I was on powdered enzymes, did not have pulmonary function tests. Things were just really dire for the CF community. We had dreams, but they were more fantasies. They were more wishes. They were really, for most of us, not realities. So things like wanting to go to college, I always had the belief that I wanted to, expect the best, but prepare for the worst and aim my life that way. But it has been quite an honor to, be part of the Pulmozyme clinical trials and then get a lung transplant, because those things really did not exist in the 70s and 80s. So it's because of all the CF families and kids that kind of paved the way for me to be alive and others.
It's amazing. Tony, would you give us a little bit of your experience being 31 and being born in the 90s and sort of how that has been a different experience from what Isabel had?
Yeah, absolutely. 32, by the way. 33 next month, so very much. I was born, in 1990, so I think in 89 was when the CF gene was found, so that was a huge milestone right there. That was before I was born, so I kind of got, I got the nuances and I got the paved way that you guys paved, you know what I mean? Everyone before me, and to me, the 90s was kind of what seems, when I look back on it, kind of the beginning of the standardization of care, of what it evolved into. It's kind of where Pulmozyme became a staple, enzymes became a staple. I was in the hypertonic saline study in the 90s. I think I was 7, 8, 9 years old, somewhere around there, which then became a staple. So I was kind of in that realm of getting all the benefits that you guys had to go through all of the trial and error for. So I kind of had a head start as far as that's concerned for the evolution of the care of CF. And I've kind of just been following that path, following that trend of standardization throughout my life, and kind of been ahead of that game, luckily, from when I was born.
No, it's interesting when you look at, there's 20 years between the two of you. I'm sort of sandwiched almost smack in the middle. And similarly to Isabel, I grew up and was diagnosed when I was 3 years old in 1984. And was told I most likely wouldn't see my 12th birthday. I did not go to a traditional care center either. I saw this little old, sorry, my doctor was a young Polish man who, when I started seeing him at Georgetown University, he was the CF care team, that's it. And he used to, we didn't have any of the breathing, pulmonary function tests or any of that stuff on a regular basis. And he used to actually measure my lung function by taking a tailor's tape and wrapping it around my chest and having me take a deep breath in and then take a deep breath out and blow it all out. And that's how he gauged how my lungs were doing at that time, and if it changed over time. And, you know, we diagnosed if you needed antibiotics by white blood cell counts at the time. We didn't have all of this new innovations or routines. I mean, my mom pounded my chest and back for 18 years through high school. We didn't have a vest or anything like that. And so I think it's just a fascinating perspective that, you know, Tony, when you were born, having this, being a benefit of those treatments and some of those standardizations that were already in place that now have continued to help so many of us thrive. And so as you think of the way that CF has evolved for each of you as we think back about the standards of care that we've had, Tony, I'd love to hear, especially from you, both of you, but how has your identity sort of shifted as the disease has changed for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think identity is a big one as far as just how we think of ourselves in general. I think anyone with a chronic illness has that on their list of how they define themselves in one way or another. And I think the goal behind that is having that identity maybe at the top, start for whatever reason you want to, but then it slowly move down where it becomes less and less of a defining trait of yours. I think that's our goal for all of us. As far as me personally, though, is that I never really wanted to define myself as someone with CF. It was kind of defined for me when I was a child. Super small community up in Summit County, Colorado. So everyone knew kind of my mom and my family and knew of me and knew that I had CF, but no one really like defined me as it or did anything. My friends knew that I went to the nurse for my enzymes and stuff like that, but it never was a huge defining role for me. As far as cystic fibrosis is concerned. And then as I grew older, I was kind of validated in some way in high school when I was on the basketball team, and the basketball coach would always, at the end of the season banquet, would always say a statement about me. I kind of was embarrassed about it, but at the same time, it was a validation of that living my life in the sense that I don't have CF. And he would always say that this kid has every excuse in the book to not do drills, not show up to practice, whatever you want to say, but he always shows up. He never wants special treatment. And he always believed that that was an inspiration to him and to the rest of his teammates. I never really thought myself of that way, but it was a validation in that sense of CF not defining who I am and that actually expressing itself. I think, though, whether we want to be identified as a person with a chronic illness or a person with CF, or however high that hierarchy is for where CF lies on your identity, I think it always pops up in weird places, whether it's defined you or not. And I think it comes up almost as a fear in some of us of when we talk about it to other people, that they will define us based on that. And I think that's kind of where that comes from, as far as we can be self-sufficient within ourselves of knowing who we are and knowing that it doesn't define us, but that fear is always there of someone or something external will define us in that way.
No, that not wanting to be defined by CF is an interesting thought process. I had a much, growing up, my parents tried not to let CF define me, played all the sports, wanted to go to college to play lacrosse, was able to do so, and never really let it define you until you have those moments where, it sort of comes up and bites you in the rear end, and it's like, oh yeah, I have CF. And I never really wanted to be identified as a person with CF, I don't think, until I got really sick in 2015. And then after that, it was kind of like, okay, like embracing that identity of a person with CF, but having all these other parts to me, dad and, professional, whatever else you want to label that with. Isabel, I'd love to hear yours being the person, being the only one of the three of us right now that has had a double lung transplant and been around for 20 years because of that, 19 years because of that. I'd love to hear sort of how your identity has changed as a person with CF and then a post-lung transplant person also.
Thank you, Chad. For sure. It's such a miracle to kind of listen to Tony and to you, Chad, and recognize the identity as being a choice. For me, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I was starting at age 5 in and out of the hospital. They did not do home IV antibiotics. They didn't do inhaled antibiotics yet. So CF just became a dominant part of my life. And until, it progressed to the point where I needed a transplant. And I've been so fortunate to be healthy after my transplant. And I could add other kind of aspects of my identity, such as, becoming an athlete, a competitive swimmer, going back to work, becoming a professional. I became a bagpiper, something I never imagined possible. And of course, this is my generation with transplant offering those miracles. But my hope and prayer is that people living today will be able to choose their identity. With CF always a part of it, because, to me, owning my disease, being able to say I have cystic fibrosis was empowering, because it also meant I had the identity of someone who was disciplined and made an effort and persevered and could endure really uncomfortable things. And that identity has served me in many other capacities as well. And I also want to say something that was touched on before, and is my mom is from Japan, and Japan is a place with very, very little CF. But my identity has been wrapped up in being a person with CF who is not white, 100% white, and being able to kind of just represent that there are people all over the globe with this disease is actually quite an honor. I know it seems tangential here, but I feel like it's important to have an identity, a cultural and a personal identity that is in addition to the CF identity.
No, I think I'm personally so impressed of 19 years post-lung transplant and all that you chose to do with those 19 years is impressive. One thing I would like to ask you is, I know in previous conversations that we've had, you talked about starting to find some of your CF identity by going to CF camps, which for a long time were a very popular thing for kids with CF until we found out that we like to share each other's bacteria, and that might not be the best of things. And so I'd love to hear sort of some of your experience. I never personally went to one myself and didn't really even know they existed, to be honest. But I'd be interested to hear your perspective on them and what that sort of identity brought for you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think I was kind of the last generation that lost camp. But camp was created so that people like me could feel less isolated and not be the only one living with CF and doing all these weird treatments. It was an extremely healing and joyful and place of belonging and connection, and education. But it also contributed to a lot of loss. And I'm not a grief counselor by accident. It's the reality of CF in the 70s and 80s. And that was very difficult. I embraced being a part of the CF community and having someone with CF, but having to work through all of the fears of my mortality throughout my young adulthood was very challenging. So again, I'm grateful that I had the chance to have the CF camp, and very grateful for, the larger CF community that we can connect with in virtual and non-physical ways. Because I think this is, one of the opportunities of CF is finding meaning and purpose. And all of you are doing that with this challenge that we have been given. So that's important as a part of my identity, to take CF and use it as a strength rather than a weakness.
No, it's cool that you had that experience, even though there were a lot of downsides to those camps, to be able to, from an early age, find your tribe, so to speak, and to realize that you weren't by yourself. For a lot of us that didn't have that experience or didn't choose to have that experience, you may not have met anybody with CF ever, and so not really know that you're not the odd one that has to go to the clinic for lunchtime to take your enzymes and hope that nobody sees it, or scheduling time with the health center at your college so that you can sneak off and do treatments and not have to explain it to hundreds of people. And so I think, as you mentioned, with this virtual community now, and the ability that we have to connect, it's not the same thing as being in person, but it provides a lot of that camaraderie for all of us that we appreciate so dearly. So let's, Tony, and I'm going to throw this to you. As you have talked about the way your identity has shifted and your life has sort of changed as you've hit these different milestones and journeys within CF, how has that sort of changed your view of life milestones, right? We have these sort of life milestones that everybody thinks is a milestone of going to college, getting married, having kids, retiring, dying, all of that stuff. But how has, as you have sort of over the past 31 years, how has your view of some of those milestones changed?
Yeah, I think for the most part, for societal milestones like that, going to college, getting married, having kids, buying a house, stuff like that, I don't think they've always been there for me. I've never really felt that they weren't attainable, even though when I was a kid, I always heard that 30 years old was the the mean age for someone with CF, but I just always kind of had a feeling that I was in an invincible sort of way when I was younger, but that I was healthier than that, and that I would probably move past that. And 30 years old is skyrockets away from 5, 6, 7. So that just felt so far away from me. So I just felt that those milestones would just come, as natural for the most part, and whatever pops up in the CF realm, I will deal with. However, having said that, I'm also growing up and getting into my late 20s and early 30s, being the single male that I am at the moment, and not married and not with kids and have no ties to pretty much anything or anyone. I'm I'm kind of a rebel when it comes to societal milestones. I think milestones kind of come in different ways, and they're not always achievements. They're defining moments in your life, defining experiences in your life, experiences and stuff that you think back to define a part of your life. Like when I was, for instance, like when I was 18 was when I first got SSDI, and college and stuff like that. That's kind of a milestone for me to think of, like, that's kind of how my life changed at that moment, to get more benefits and more health benefits and things I don't have to think about too much anymore, because I got to be on Medicare and Medicaid very early in my life, which was awesome. And then fast forward to Trikafta is also a milestone, and that's not necessarily an achievement, but it's a point in time for my life that changed the trajectory of my life, of ways that I had to think differently of how to do that. And then even prior to that, and like a year and a half before Trikafta, I went through a huge process and a huge milestone. It just was funny that it got so like wiped away clean right when Trikafta came across. But I went through a huge process of really thinking about the rest of my life and really getting in touch with that this is a degenerative disease. I was at that point in my life where it's like, I need to keep my lung functions were in the 60s. I was like, I need to keep that as long as possible. That's when I was playing with the band every weekend, and I was living in Golden. So my whole thing was, once through that trajectory, I was, I made that decision to take care of myself all week so then I could do the things that I love to do, which was play music every weekend. And then Trikafta came along, and that changed everything. And all of a sudden, all the doors that I closed and were okay with closing kind of became open again if I wanted them to be. And then a milestone for all of us was March 2020, which, as my life opened up, the entirety of the world closed down. So all of those things to me are more milestone-istic, I suppose, of how your life changes and the trajectory it changes, and like the mindset that your life takes a turn for. And it's not necessarily achievements in the same sense that we like to think of them.
No, that not fitting into these traditional milestones is very millennial of you.
What can I say? I'm a millennial.
As someone who doesn't have much space to talk, because apparently I'm a geriatric millennial, which I still don't understand. I think they just lost my years in this whole Gen Y, Gen Z thing. But I think it's a very interesting perspective of, it almost makes you shift the conversation from like life milestones to CF milestones. And as I mentioned, being diagnosed at 3 and life expectancy of 12-ish, once I hit 12, besides having severe panic attacks, about dying, I sort of took this approach to myself and those milestones as they were never going to happen because I was already on borrowed time. And so it was like, all right, well, I'm just gonna like coast, right? School won't be 100%. I'll focus more on hanging out with friends and playing sports and doing those things, and not necessarily preparing or thinking about graduating from college, And then once I graduated from college, it was like, all right, I'll get a job and do what I can. I managed a bar for 2 years, which probably wasn't the smartest thing back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when you could still smoke in bars, which now seems like a far, far distant nightmare almost, I guess, maybe. So like getting married and having kids weren't necessarily, that's when it happens when I talk about my family. And so I think it's just a fascinating perspective of, as a person with CF, do we necessarily have those traditional milestones, or are they more like CF milestones? And so, Isabel, I'd love to hear your perspective on how with your transplant and everything and the different careers you've had and becoming a bagpiper, which I wish you had brought them so you could like play us out. Should have thought of that.
No, you don't. No, you don't.
But I would just love to get your perspective on sort of how you viewed these milestones, especially being born in the 70s with CF.
Thank you. I think for me, when CF was such a dominant part of my life, it was so important for me to be normal in some way, to have a normal life, normal activities, and to be, quote, normal, it meant I had to give 200% effort. So to me, milestones were goals to reach for. Maybe they'd happen, maybe they wouldn't, but why not dream? And so, going to college, I did not expect to graduate. I expected to go for the experience and say I went to college. But then my other choices opened up. Like I wanted to live in Japan for a year. That's kind of crazy with CF, but I did it anyway. And then getting married. We did not choose to have children. There was a time where it was still just a question of whether to be able to raise children. But the truth is my husband doesn't like children. That's what that's the reality. And I think, of course, my main milestone was, of course, being sick enough to need a transplant. And I received that transplant in the final hours of my life with cystic fibrosis. And so just being able to survive to 32 when I got my transplant was a huge milestone, because I remember in the 90s, some of my CF friends who got experimental transplants and they lived 1 or 2 years. And so being able to live this long and reach my 50s and need bifocals and all that good middle-aged stuff, those are my most proudest milestones that I've accomplished. And yes, I've lived a very normal life, and I'm forever grateful despite having CF.
I think.
Oh, and one more thing I just want to mention, as a 51-year-old, one of my greatest milestones now is taking care of my elderly parents. I always wanted to give back. I want to take care of them the way they've taken care of me. And it is such a profound blessing to be able to serve my elderly parents. I hope everyone with CF gets that opportunity.
It's such a cool thing that you can do that now. As we all in this room and online and stuff know that that is a much more realistic possibility now, right? Especially as the life expectancy we learned earlier was 56 now if you're born. I believe it's 56. And so, right, that right there starts to make you think about retirement, right? And having had conversations with many others with CF, especially when something like Trikafta came out, and they were in their 20s or 30s or 40s, it's like, holy shit. Sorry, said I wouldn't do it. It's like, okay, now I have to think about retirement. And then it's like 30, you're already 30 or 40, and maybe you haven't worked because you've been too sick or whatnot, but it's like, now what do I have to do? How do I even get a 401k? How do I make up that lost time that other people don't necessarily lose, right? Because they graduate and they sort of go on this normal life milestone journey and get a job and start working and saving. And like you mentioned, taking care of your parents and not having them pass away before you is a very cool, morbid, but cool experience to be able to be a part of, hopefully, for so many. And so as we move forward a little bit, we sort of talked all about how we have evolved and changed through our identity and milestones as CF has changed so much in this short time period. And instead of continuing to look back, I would love to hear from the both of you. We talk about dreams, but let's bring it out of the clouds and sort of this cure, not that a cure for CF is a cloud, but sort of more tangible dreams right now and progress. And I would love to hear from the two of you, like what progress for you is as we go forward.
Want to start us off, Isabel?
Sure, thank you, Tony. I think number one, that progress to me is everyone has access to a modulator drug, regardless of ethnic background or financial means or insurance. That's progress to me. I'm going to just say it, as much as I'm grateful for my organ donor, I want transplant to be an obsolete treatment for people with cystic fibrosis. It's too risky. It's too difficult, and we have too much to live for with all the other interventions that we have. So that would be progress to me. I also think that, I'd like to see what didn't happen when I was younger, because we were all so focused on physical survival, was mental health and being able to serve those with cystic fibrosis who are struggling with mental health needs because of the disease, but also because life is hard, period. And then other progress that would be that everyone can reach their fullest human potential and live out the full human lifespan. Maybe even someday, progress would be that we have geriatric CF centers.
Tony?
Yeah, so as I fully agree, the access thing is huge. Having access to drugs now that are already on the market and access to future treatments is a big one. I think it's a little heady as far as like what it looks like to get to that point, but I think that's a big one for our community to keep reaching towards, is to give access to everybody for all the treatments that are on the market. I very firmly believe that progress is a very individual thing. It depends on who you are as a CF patient, as who you are as an adult with CF, child with CF, whatever. And I think in that scope that can generalize everything would be that progress is an individual being able to do more of what they want to do every day rather than what they have to do every day for their CF. And that comes down to, one, access, like we have talked about, and also two, it comes down to the individual to do what they need to do and find the access to the things that are already on the market and fix their priorities in a way that they can do what they want to do and slowly but surely get to do more of what they want to do rather than what they have to do.
No, you both talk about access, and as a former advocacy co-chair, Mary and Dave, I'm checking this box off. I think these medicines don't do us any good if we don't have access to them, and that is through insurance, and it is through affordability, and it's through having the continued care and access to the people that help us navigate those issues, as well as provide the support and the medicine for them. And so I think access is a big one. I think it plays many different roles. It's not just access to the medicine, but Isabel, it's access to the care, like you talked about, especially from a mental health perspective. That is has been a common concern for a long time now in the community, but it's finally starting to be more normalized. I hit a really bad state several months ago where I was very depressed, lots of anxiety, and I was able to go to my care center and say, this is my issue, this is how I feel. And they were able to, sit down, talk me through it, and then say, here, like, I call them my happy pills now. But like that ability was there, and that became through some of that progress that we've talked about. Progress to me is having all of those things, is having access for everyone to have a modulator. But it's also being able to sit in this room and have the three of us on this stage instead of, staring at a computer screen with each other. It's being able to not have to stand 6 feet apart with a mask on to say hi to somebody who you have known virtually for so long. And then I think, as you both have mentioned, progress is having this disease become an afterthought, and it's slowly coming that way. I know growing up, it was always in the back of your mind, and Tony, you mentioned something that sort of resonated is spending more time doing what you want to do, having been born in the 80s and not necessarily had all of that access like you did initially to the pulmozymes and the hypertonic saline. I wasn't used to a long, detailed treatment regimen until I got sick in my early 20s, and then again in my late 20s. And then all of these, those treatments turned from 30 minutes of my mom pounding on my back to 2.5 hours twice a day. And now with things like Trikafta, some of that is coming back, but it's also very hard to give up that treatment regimen, right? Even if somebody is saying, hey, because of the progress we've made, you no longer need that inhaled antibiotic every month. We can scale that back. Or, you can scale back some of your treatments to focus on doing what you want to do. But for me, there is a fear of if I don't do those treatments and I'm not disciplined, things are going to fall off the rail. And so for me, some of that progress is not having these other people even think about that, not having to miss school because of hospital stays, maybe just having to take 2 pills a day instead of 60 to 70 to 80 like so many of us do now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that what you said too kind of spans this whole conversation, but that everyone's standardization of care, everyone's progress, everyone's identity, all of that stuff is also individual. We're in a group together that has CF. We have shared experiences, but at the same time, something that works for somebody might not work for somebody else. And I also think that a big thing for that, as far as progress is concerned, is I have to remind myself of this all the time, not only in the CF community, but just in society at large, is to not compare myself to other people. And now more than ever, that is, I think, a huge notion for all of us to take into consideration, is that just because you're more healthy than someone with CF doesn't mean you're better or they're worse. Just because someone with CF is trying to climb Everest doesn't mean that you have to aspire to do that either. It's all things that you need to figure out for how your body works and what you want to do, and whatever you want to do with your life is okay, and whatever anyone else wants to do is also okay. And it's promoting both of those things, but also being careful of trying not to compare ourselves, whether sick or whether healthy, to everybody else, and just try to promote everyone getting to where they want to go.
No, and it's funny that you say that comparison thing, right? Because for all of us in the community, every 3 months, we are compared to a average person of your height and weight and age as you do your PFT, right? It's like, what that healthy person should look like. And so I think that is a really interesting point that you bring up, and not having to compare ourselves to somebody else, but being not even having to be an option, right? Not even a thought process, because you are not this person with the disease anymore. And so as we finish some of this stuff up, I would just love to give both Isabel and Tony the ability, if there's anything wise, sage words of wisdom that you would like to leave with the community, to go ahead.
I just want to thank you, Tony and Chad, for your wisdom, and just having this conversation is such a gift. I also see progress as creating space in our lives where all the drive we had for so many years to stay alive and do treatments and make the most of this life, what I call the sense of urgency, is relaxed. We're going to be okay. We're going to live. And now we can fill our spaces with other things and use that drive for snowboarding or bagpiping or everything else we love. So my hope, I guess my definition of progress really is that CF will become a manageable chronic illness, not one that threatens life, but rather enhances it and continues to be a teacher to all of us, to cherish each day and to appreciate, the preciousness of life, and to be grateful that we're alive, no matter how hard it can sometimes be. And that we continue to create community with each other to serve those who are not as fortunate as we are in our CF journeys. So that's my definition of kind of wisdom around this whole idea of progress. And I want to thank every single person watching this for your touch point, your contribution, large or ginormous, to make this progress a reality for so many of us.
Absolutely.
Ooh. Yeah, I think what we've talked before in some of our conversations too is that something to realize is that if we don't do our treatments, if we're not on the modulators we are going to be taken down by CF. CF is still the same across the board, whether once you take away all of those things. So we need all of those things in order to do that. And also to kind of piggyback off of what I already said, but moving forward is like when Isabel was a kid, her hardness as far as dealing with this was just as valid as Chad's. It was just as valid as mine, even though mine was way less hard than Isabel's, way less hard than Chad's. And now people being born now, it's going to be way less hard, but still taking 2 pills twice a day for Trikafta, for instance, is daunting to someone who just realized that they have CF and they have to do this for the rest of their life, even though that I had to do 30 pills to start. But always progressing and always making that starting point ever further, and that, always giving people a head start that are coming after us is always a good thing. And we want people to come into the game with a head start and with everything they could possibly have, so then their life can be as full and rich as we have been able to make ourselves.
I feel like I've used "I think" a lot today. But I appreciate the honesty from the two of you, and I think, Tony, what you just sort of hit on is, and we talk about this a lot when we say you share your story, right? Like, you're the expert of your story, and the amazing thing to me of CF right now is just sort of what we talked about and what you talk about when you hear other people's CF journeys, is how vast the experiences are, and how, even with all of that, we have been able to make all of this progress, right? It's not like a disease where, or, you know, for instance, a cancer like you're dealing with right now as well, where it's like, okay, you have this form of cancer, here's how we treat it, right? CF just impacts all of us so differently, and so the fact that we have been able to get this far with those treatments and breakthroughs is truly pretty exceptional. And I am excited for the future of what this disease will look like. Maybe it'll be after I'm gone, who knows, but like, you know, for kids now who are growing up, and for them it's like, okay, you take these 2 pills, and for the most part, hopefully, you will have this incredibly long, full life where you won't miss school for hospital stays, or you won't not be able to go over to somebody's house to spend the night because, you know, you have all of your treatments you still have to do, and maybe they're not as familiar with the disease or don't know what. And so I think that there's some really fun and exciting things happening here. And I think the next 5 to 10 years are going to be incredible for this community. It's even shorter than it was beforehand. So with that, I want to thank both of you so much for doing this and giving of your time. It was an absolute pleasure to get to know the both of you over the past 5 weeks, I think. And thanks for helping this be such a success. And then lastly, I have to give a special shout out to Christina, Melody, and Shelley, who is the only reason this thing happened. They took all of this and put it together in 2.5 months. And I'm grateful for it. The notes they took, I have a binder upstairs, I feel like, that's like an inch and a half thick from the copious notes that were taken. So thank you. And then to all of you here and online, thank you very much for listening. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the conference. And thanks for all you do. So.